Forget the nationalist myth of an orderly, pious pioneer camping trip. In the 1830s, the Great Trek was a chaotic and violent mass exodus of thousands desperate to escape British law. By the 1830s, the British Cape Colony was rapidly modernizing. The administration had mandated English as the language of the courts, restructured land ownership, and abolished slavery with financial compensation that many farmers found ruinous. The trekkers weren't just moving, they were fleeing a system they'd no longer recognized. Andries Hendrik Potgieter was the uncompromising face of this resentment. A wealthy sheep farmer and veteran of the frontier wars, he stood over 6 feet tall and commanded a massive following through a combination of personal wealth and a severe, charismatic authority. Potgieter's specific paranoia about British maritime power would dictate the path of the migration. His refusal to live within reach of a British port would eventually draw the inland borders of the modern South African state. Looking at a topographical map of the region, the strategic split within the movement is clear. The majority of Trek leaders, including Piet Retief, were drawn to the east, the fertile, well-watered coastal region of Natal. Potgieter fiercely argued against the coast. He understood that any Boer republic with a harbor would be a target for the British Navy, making annexation only a matter of time. He proposed an alternative, marching deep into the arid interior of the Highveld. By establishing a landlocked state hundreds of miles from the sea, he planned to build an overland trade route to Portuguese-held Delagoa Bay, staying entirely out of British reach. This geographic dispute created a permanent strategic fracture. One faction pursued a maritime future in Natal, while Potgieter's followers committed to an isolationist existence on the Highveld. Pushing north put Potgieter on a collision course with the region's dominant power, the Ndebele kingdom. At the Battle of Vegkop in 1836, Potgieter and just 40 men successfully defended their families against thousands of Ndebele warriors. They used a logger, a circle of wagons chained together into a makeshift fortress, to leverage their superior rifle fire against overwhelming numbers. Following this defense, Potgieter launched a series of mobile raids. His commandos leveraged their horses and firearms to destroy Ndebele kraals, effectively clearing rival indigenous powers from the Highveld. But his reputation for tactical brilliance didn't travel well. In 1838, Potgieter rode into Natal to assist the coastal trekkers after they suffered a Zulu ambush. Recognizing the terrain was a death trap, he ordered an immediate retreat, refusing to commit his men to what he saw as a suicide mission. The survivors in Natal were incensed. They branded him a coward and mockingly named his unit the Flight Commando. Offended and isolated, Potgieter abandoned the coastal faction entirely. He retreated back to the Highveld, determined to build a state that answered only to him. This historical map shows Potgieter's transition from a guerrilla leader to a state builder. He directed a chain of settlements that pushed Boer influence hundreds of miles north, establishing an administrative spine that reached as far as the Zoutpansbergdorp Mountains. His governance was a military autocracy. He rejected civilian legislatures, believing that a lawless frontier required a dictator who could demand absolute obedience from his commandos. To pay for this state, Potgieter bypassed British ports and shipped ivory through Delagoa Bay. It was a lucrative, independent trade corridor that kept his republic financially viable and entirely separate from the British economy. But this economy relied on a dark system of labor known as in-book selling. Potgieter's commandos launched unprovoked raids on petty and Laka villages, seizing livestock and kidnapping indigenous children to be raised as forced laborers on Boer farms. For Potgieter, total independence was a zero-sum game. Survival on the Highveld required a might-makes-right economy that functioned as a localized form of frontier slavery. Potgieter died in 1852 in the remote north. Decades of continuous warfare and political infighting had aged him prematurely. By his late 50s, he possessed the frailty of a man 20 years older. Nearly a century later, his legacy underwent a dramatic transformation. During the rise of institutionalized Afrikaner nationalism in the 1940s, the history of the Trek was actively rewritten. The messy reality of the autocratic warlord was sanitized. Nationalist leaders cast Potgieter in granite at the Voortrekker monument, reinventing him as a pious, divinely ordained pioneer. But his true achievement was spatial. By aggressively settling the deep interior, he secured the massive territories of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State, ensuring that the interior of South Africa would be governed by Boer law not British policy. Potgieter's frontier methods, the creation of segregated native reserves, and the legal coercion of the invoke-selling system, did not disappear with him. These practices established a localized administrative template for racial control that nationalist leaders would eventually scale into the national laws of the 1940s.